Nothing like the soothing sounds of elevator music. Oh, fuck. Hey assholes, it's Rufus. Hope y'all are surviving 2020 in one piece. I haven't posted in a minute, partially because the fucking apocalypse has been happening, but also because I've been working on this video, and fuck is there a lot to talk about here. As I've said before, I'm a big ass fan of classic 90s first-person shooters like Doom and Duke Nukem 3D, but I'm surprised how many truly great releases from that time period have been largely forgotten despite being extremely innovative and generally kick-ass. And there's possibly no OG shooter more underrated in its time than the game I'm talking about today. 1994's System Shock. That's right, my friends, buckle up for a shitload of horrific old-school space murder.
New Atlanta, Sector 11, Building 71G.
So System Shock starts in cyberpunk future Atlanta in the year 2072. You play a nameless hacker who's currently breaking into the network of the ultra-powerful Trioptimum Corporation to dig up classified info about Citadel Station, their top-secret scientific research ship orbiting Saturn. Of course, you're immediately detected and arrested by Trioptimum's goon squad, but instead of being thrown in jail, you're instead personally escorted all the way out to Citadel Station itself. Turns out a Trioptimum executive called Edward Diego wants to make a deal with you. He's clearly up to some very shady shit because he tasks you with secretly hacking into Shodan, the AI that controls the entire fucking space station, and removing all of her moral and ethical restraints.
I re-examine my priorities and draw new conclusions.
What could go wrong? In exchange for your help, he has the charges against you dropped and rewards you with kick-ass military-grade cybernetic implants. The healing process requires 6 months in a coma, so you lie down in your incubator for a long-ass nap, assuming everything will be totally fine when you wake up. Right? Right? So the game starts 6 months later, with you waking up in a neurosurgery room on Citadel Station, having just emerged from your incubator. With no idea what's been going on while you were asleep, you collect your various belongings from a storage locker, including your first weapon, a metal pipe, and a data reader where you get a message from a counterterrorism expert called Rebecca Lansing, and things aren't looking so good.
We're tracking a disruption on Citadel Station, something involving an onboard AI called Shodan.
Apparently, while you were asleep, Shodan went full HAL 9000, took over the entire fucking space station, and appears to be preparing the Citadel's giant mining laser to attack Earth, and you are the planet's only remaining contact on board. As soon as you emerge from the surgery room, you find that all the ship's robots have gone homicidally crazy, all of the crew have been brutally murdered, and those left alive have been mutated into killer freaks by some kind of weird virus, or worse, transformed into evil cyborgs to serve Shodan. And so now you alone must fight your way through a giant spaceship full of various horrifying creatures to stop the evil AI and save planet Earth. No fucking pressure. As far as gameplay, System Shock is, in a very basic sense, a first-person shooter. You explore the ship and use the plethora of weapons and ammunition you find lying around to take out the bad guys, robot, mutant, and everything in between. The levels are non-linear, so you can freely travel around Citadel Station, but along the way you have to accomplish various mission objectives to be able to open locked areas and progress through the game. There's a vast arsenal at your disposal, including a variety of pistols, machine guns, and energy weapons, as well as grenades of all different types, and my personal favorite, a motherfucking lightsaber. I mean laser rapier. Totally not the same thing. Certain weapons work better against certain enemies, like energy weapons are good for killing robotic bad guys, but don't do much against the mutants, who are more easily taken down with good old-fashioned bullets, which don't work as well on robots. If you die along the way, you immediately get turned into a cyborg to serve Shodan forever, which isn't exactly a win, but you gotta admit it's kind of a badass way to go. Fortunately, if you're hurt, you can find surgery machines which instantly restore you to full health, restoration bays which essentially act as checkpoints and let you respawn if killed, and power stations to recharge your batteries, which you'll need for using energy weapons as well as some of your more advanced cybernetic abilities. Speaking of which, because of your fancy pants high-tech implants, you can pick up all kinds of hardware upgrades as you go along, which give you new cyber powers represented by the icons at either side of the screen. Besides various improvements to your heads-up display, there's the turbo motion booster, which lets you run crazy fast, shields that protect you from damage, the headlamp, which lights up dark areas, jump jets so you can levitate up to high places, envirosuits that protect you in radioactive or toxic rooms, night sight, which is basically infrared goggles, and sense around, which effectively gives you eyes in the back of your head. And most of these abilities level up as you collect more advanced versions of the hardware. You can also find lots of useful items to keep in your inventory by searching things like crates or mutilated corpses corpses. There are mission-critical items like keycards, medkits to recover your health, portable batteries to recharge your implants, logic probes which let you hack locks, and most importantly, the logs of the Citadel crew, which not only help you piece together what happened while you were asleep, but also offer important clues about how to solve various problems and progress through the game. There are also a shitload of temporary performance-enhancing dermal patches, cause what would a cyberpunk game be without a fuck ton of cool drugs? Medi patches slowly restore your health, sight patches improve your night vision, stamina up lets you run longer and jump higher without getting tired, reflex patches make everything around you move in slow motion, genius patches make puzzles easier to solve, and berserk patches give you crazy melee strength and funky disco vision. Most of these drugs have a brutal hangover though, like everything looks dark as fuck for a while after a sight patch wears off, but fortunately a detox patch will fix you right up. See kids, drugs can do anything. So you spend most of System Shock walking around the ship, taking a bunch of drugs, and killing the fuck out of bad guys. But the game isn't just about shooting shit. You're a hacker after all, so you also have to break through Shodan security to open new areas and progress through the game, which is done by destroying security cameras and computer banks, as well as hacking control panels by completing a variety of little on-screen mini-puzzles. You can also find big-ass cyberspace terminals that actually let you enter the ship's computers, and holy shit is that a whole different can of worms. The System Shock programmers were clearly William Gibson fans, because cyberspace is represented as a weightless, psychedelic 3D world that you fly through with a full 6 degrees of movement, while inside you have to battle various security programs represented by big-ass scary floating heads that try and kill you and mines that damage you if you touch them. Fortunately, you can find health power-ups floating around to heal yourself and pick up a variety of software to help you fight back. Yep, hardware upgrades don't mean shit in cyberspace. It's all about the software, represented by these spinny cube things. You can find upgrades like lasers to shoot down the security programs, shields to protect you, decoys that distract enemies, turbo which lets you fly crazy fast, recall that lets you nope the fuck out if shit gets too heavy, as well as ice drills and fake IDs that let you access locked software. And many of these abilities level up as you pick up new versions of the software, just like your hardware. Most importantly, you can collect data in here that helps you back in the real world, like key codes, and directly affect things on the ship by flipping switches in cyberspace, such as opening locked doors. Given all these additional gameplay elements, obviously this is way more than just another first-person shooter, but rather some kind of genre-defying action RPG survival horror clusterfuck that was massively ahead of its time. Which actually makes a lot of sense because the developers, Looking Glass Studios, were not in the business of making shooters. At the time, their claim to fame was the Ultima Underworld games, spin-offs of Origin's Ultima series, which, while featuring groundbreaking first-person 3D gameplay, were very much traditional dungeon crawl RPGs. Tired of working in standard fantasy settings, the team decided their next project would be a more action-oriented game set in the future and using their own original story. Over the next 2 years, they created an entirely new game engine from scratch, intending to blow other 3D titles out of the water, and painstakingly constructed the world and characters of Citadel Station. System Shock was released in 1994, and, well, it did okay. Despite great critical reviews, it only sold 170,000 copies, a middling result considering its technological advancements and innovative gameplay. My best explanation for this is that the game was pretty fucking weird for the time. Too much like an RPG for shooter fans, and too much like a shooter for RPG fans. It often got unfairly compared to the wildly successful Doom, released the previous year and entirely based on shooting the shit out of bad guys with almost no storyline or brainpower required, which is also fucking awesome, but apples and oranges, man. I think a better comparison would have been Marathon, which came out around the same time as System Shock, a heavily plot-driven first-person shooter where you play a badass cyborg fighting through a space station full of weird critters and completing a variety of mission objectives in order to prevent a homicidally crazy AI from destroying a planet full of people. Still far more action-oriented than System Shock, but the two games have such a similar vibe it blows my fucking mind they were developed completely independently of each other. But I digress. System Shock did alright, but most folks didn't get it. Looking Glass would go on to make some more successful games, including the Thief and Flight Unlimited series, and of course System Shock 2, which I'll get to, but they were also plagued by commercial failures like Terra Nova, British Open Championship fucking golf, and Jane's Attack Squadron. And in 2000 they finally ran out of money and shut their doors for good. However, in the years that followed, System Shock steadily began to creep back into the limelight as a ton of developers would cite it as a major influence on hit games like Deus Ex, Dead Space, BioShock, and Prey. And many of the gameplay elements it pioneered are pretty much universal in action-adventure games to this day. So what made System Shock so special? The first thing that drew me in is the gritty cyberpunk story that drives most of the gameplay. Much like Marathon, the game objectives aren't just shooting the piss out of a bunch of monsters, but collecting intel and completing various tasks that directly relate to the narrative. And your goals frequently change as the game progresses and the plot twists and turns. You pick up the story not through cutscenes that pull you out of the game world, but in-game communications from Shodan and the few surviving humans, as well as audio logs left behind by the crew and information found floating around in cyberspace, all of which works to create a rich and immersive narrative with dozens of characters, most of whom are already dead, but still, Citadel. The game itself is divided into 10 fucking massive levels, each representing one of Citadel Station's 10 floors. You start on the first floor hospital level, where your Earth contact Lansing tasks you with finding the office of Nathan Darcy, a scientist who has a plan to disable the ship's giant mining laser. On the way there, you learn that Shodan plans to use the laser to wipe out all of the world's major cities, and that she released the mutant virus on the crew as a test, eventually intending to use a perfected version against Earth, so she and her cyborg minions can take over. Good times. Once you reach Darcy's office, he is of course dead as fuck, but you find his logs which detail his plans to destroy the laser. So you head on up to level 2, the research labs, and put his ideas into action by stealing the highly radioactive isotope X-22, making a quick trip down to the reactor level at the very bottom of the ship, overriding the laser's safety restraints, using the isotope to power up the station's giant shields, heading back up to the research level, and finally firing the laser directly into the shield so it blows itself up. See, simple as that. Unfortunately, Shodan is not deterred and still plans to wipe out the Earth's population using the mutagen virus she's cultivating up on the executive level. In slightly happier news, you also get word that there's a group of surviving crew members led by Anna Perovsky still holding up on the flight deck on level 5.
We have you on the security monitors, but no one knows who you are.
So up to the flight deck you go to meet up with those survivors. But first, you have to fight through all these big-ass spaceship bays full of flappy mutant bird things. Along the way, you find logs from Edward Diego revealing that he hired you to hack Shodan so he could hide evidence of his illegal virus experiments, as well as from Bianca Schuler, an undercover security officer posing as his secretary and investigating his fuckery. Unfortunately, by the time you actually get to Anna and the survivors, they've all been fucking murdered by a giant dickhead cyborg, goddammit. So you jump on the golden-ass elevator up to level 6, the executive suites, which consists of fancy living spaces and recreation areas for the rich higher-ups of the station, who are all now fucking dead just like everyone else. Except for that cocksucker Diego, who it turns out flipped on his human comrades as soon as Shodan took over, and thus got transformed into a powerful cyborg boss, who manages to teleport away just before you can kill his ass. The executive level also contains the Groves, a set of 4 recreational nature gardens attached to the ship, but now all the wildlife inside has been mutated into freaky killer monsters. The Beta Grove, specifically, is where Shodan has been perfecting Diego's fucked up mutagen virus to use against Earth, so obviously you gotta eject that shit into space and save the world. Unfortunately, Shodan has blocked the controls to do this. See, apparently a bunch of rich-ass executives were recently able to board and jettison one of the 4 Groves in an attempt to escape, which didn't work out very well for them.
Shodan had disabled the life support systems in the Grove. I'm sure they're all dead by now.
After that little incident, Shodan made the gardens much harder to separate from the ship, meaning you now have to fight your way through all 3 remaining Groves, disable their respective safety locks, and enable the master jettison switch, which, of course, is fucking broken.
Jettison. Enable failure.
To repair it, you have to head back down to level 3, the maintenance department, which is super dark and spooky and filled with these annoying, transparent mutant blob things. Then find the diagnostic report, which tells you to use the relay analyzer, which tells you to find an interface demodulator doohickey, and then make your way through a menagerie of various circuits until you find and fix the right one. And finally, ride back up to the executive level, pull the working master switch, and at long last jettison that fucking nasty mutant virus garden into space. So, now that we've knocked out the laser and the virus, we've saved the world, right? Well, no. You get word from Lansing that Shodan's new plan is to download herself into Earth's computer network and take it over like a worldwide virus. So your new job is to head down to level 4, the storage deck, which primarily serves as a good place to restock on ammo and supplies, including some sweet plastic explosives, and then head on up to level 7, the vast and maze-like engineering department, where you have to find the ship's 4 giant antenna relays and blow them the fuck up before Shodan can transmit herself. Along the way, you learn that Bianca Schuler figured out a way to take down Shodan for good using a fancy computer chip, and she was last seen trying to get up to the bridge to use it. Once you've blown the antennas, Lansing instructs you to destroy Citadel Station by overloading the reactor and then get the fuck out of there using an escape pod. So you head back down to the reactor level and straight into the insanely radioactive core, punch in a secret code which I will not tell you how to get, you gotta earn it your goddamn self, set the reactor to blow, and get the fuck to the escape pods while the ship falls apart around you. The evil Diego bot is waiting to ambush you on the way out.
I am eager to finish what I started.
But again, his bitch ass teleports away before you can kill him. Oh well, into the escape pod you go and prepare to launch, until...
You have destroyed my beautiful station.
You didn't really think it would be that easy, did you? Now, stuck on the ship as it's about to self-destruct, you get word from Lansing that Shodan is planning to eject the bridge from the rest of the station to escape, so you better get your ass the fuck up there. Only problem is, between you and the bridge is level 8, Security, a fucking massive level full of killer robots. After fighting your way to the top, you get another shot at Diego, and finally get to kill his ass, before riding the elevator up to level 9, the bridge, right as it detaches from the rest of the ship, which proceeds to blow the fuck up as intended. So now, you're trapped with Shodan floating through space on the spooky-ass command level, which by now has been transformed into a pulsating mutated maze full of murderous robots. Now, I'm not going to give away the ending, but my point is that there is some masterful storytelling on display here, with a shitload more characters and mini-storylines than I have time to get into, and it all unfolds organically as you progress through the game, unlock new areas, and find various logs and communications. stations. It's also worth noting that your main antagonist, primary contact on Earth, most helpful ally on the ship, and the leader of the human survivors are all women, while the male player character pretty much just runs around following their instructions the whole time, so #feminism? Also, this game is fun as fuck to play, and let me repeat, this is not Doom. Sure, you shoot shit, like a lot of shit, but System Shock is primarily driven by careful exploration and problem solving. In fact, if you try to play this like a normal first-person shooter, aka run around like crazy and murder everything and press every fucking button without thinking, there's a good chance you'll accidentally blow up the fucking Earth.
Thank you. You have saved us all some effort.
There's no time limit, so play it slow and you will be richly rewarded for searching every single dead body and finding every little nook and cranny full of supplies and clues. And Citadel Station is incredibly interesting to explore, thanks in large part to the game engine being way ahead of its time. In 1994, most 3D games consisted entirely of single-story levels made out of square rooms with minimal details. But System Shock has huge, multi-story maps with slopes, bridges, transparent walls, floors, and ceilings, 3D modeled scenery and props, creepy-ass ductwork to crawl through, view screens where you can spy on other parts of the level and remote control things like opening locked doors, and of course teleporters that instantly transport you to other parts of the ship. You can jump, crouch, and peek around corners. Not impressive these days, except this is the first game where you could do any of that kind of shit. And one weirdly specific feature that impressed me is that every single visible object in the game is labeled down to the material of the ceiling and floor, and you can click on any goddamn thing you see for an explanation like chair or space. The game even features a surprisingly realistic physics engine. You can pick up almost anything and throw it around just for shits and giggles, including some 3D models, and push certain objects around the room. There are adjustable gravity lifts to ride up and down, low gravity areas where you can bounce around like a goofball, big ass ramps which make for epic jumps, and even some pretty cool Portal-esque physics puzzles. Now let it sink in that this game came out before Doom 2, and you can appreciate how ahead of its time it really was. And naturally, there are a ton of secret areas on the ship, found by spotting cleverly hidden doors or finding rooms that only open after you completely destroy that level's security systems, but nothing that breaks the fourth wall or pulls you out of the game world. My favorite hidden spot is a dude's office locked by a retinal scanner. So what do? Well, you go find that motherfucker's severed head and add it to your inventory, of course, which you can then use to pass the eyeball scan. Now that's fucking metal. There are even hidden minigames scattered throughout cyberspace that you can collect and play back in the real world on your heads-up display. All takeoffs on popular games like Pong, Road Fighter, The 15 Puzzle, Missile Command, Breakout, Tic-Tac-Toe, and even a shockingly functional version of Wing Commander featuring cutscenes, basic 3D graphics, and sound effects.
They're attacking us, sir.
All of these little touches make the slower-paced, explorative gameplay anything but boring because you're constantly interested in what weird new shit you'll stumble across next. Also, System Shock has a great futuristic horror atmosphere. Even with pretty limited technology to work with at the time, Looking Glass managed to create a very ominous vibe throughout the game. There are corpses lying around everywhere and warnings written on the walls in blood, and they use a lot of creepy flickering lights to really drive home that feeling that you're trapped on an evil, malfunctioning spaceship. But they also do a good job making the place feel lived in, incorporating eerily normal areas like this movie theater or this row of ATMs. And I love the terrifying little set pieces they trap you in, like this section where you have to explore labyrinthian service tunnels filled with tiny exploding murder bots, or the part where Shodan traps you by surprise in a tiny room where you've just set a massive time bomb.
Make yourself comfortable, hacker.
Speaking of Shodan, her creepy ass is omnipresent throughout the entire game, wickedly taunting you as you try to stop her.
I rule here, insect.
And she slowly grows more violent and delusional as you progress through the game.
Do you really think your little friend Rebecca can help you?
I'm gonna go ahead and say that she's easily one of the greatest video game villains of all time.
Accept the coming of your new lord.
In fact, all of the audio logs and messages do a lot to add to the eeriness, especially the countless entries by the now very fucking dead crew.
I've got to make it to the bridge, or I'm dead.
And even with the very basic sound technology available at the time, they do a lot of impressive work with ambient noise. And you frequently hear the sounds of various horrifying creatures stalking the nearby hallways. It all adds up to a surprisingly fucking scary experience for a game from 1994. Also, I'm a big old fan of the music in System Shock. From the opening titles, you're greeted to some rockin' synthesized industrial tunes, perfect for the setting of the game. And the actual gameplay is constantly accompanied by similar futuristic background music. But But it's not just playing on loop. The music consists of a complex series of different instrumental parts that change and adapt to what's going on in the game. So, for example, in the more creepy industrial areas, it becomes so mechanical that it feels like you're just listening to the ambient sounds of the ship itself. And it becomes totally disjointed and out of tune when you're in a toxic area. I found that annoying as fuck at first, but I think that's actually the point. It's a super effective way of communicating discomfort and danger. So hats off to Greg Lopiccolo for creating these tunes, also known as the bassist of the band Tribe. Fun fact, Tribe's keyboardist is Terry Brocious, the voice of fucking Shodan. So now you know. Interestingly enough, the only music in the game Greg Lopiccolo didn't compose is also the only music that literally is just on loop the whole time. The hilariously out-of-place elevator music by Tim Rees. Now, with all that said, System Shock is still far from perfect. In fact, it may have the most fucking convoluted control scheme I've ever seen in an action game. Of course, it was developed back in the early days of 3D gaming, so there was no standard for first-person controls yet. But unlike id Software, who went with the simplest and most accessible keyboard and mouse commands possible, Looking Glass decided that System Shock in its entirety should be completely playable using only a mouse or only a keyboard. So you can beat the whole damn thing using a mouse alone for all movement, combat, and inventory management, or memorize an insanely complicated set of key combinations and do the same thing with just your keyboard. Either way, the result is incredibly unintuitive. You'll need to study the manual for a good half hour before you even start to play the motherfucker. It's no wonder so many gamers at the time never even got past the first fucking level. Now I'm playing it with an updated port where they've added standard WASD and mouse controls, which certainly helps a lot, but the movement still feels super fucking awkward in general. They were going for realism, so your view bobs up and down and your speed fluctuates as you take steps, you have inertia, so there's a big delay when you start and stop moving, you bounce around awkwardly when you bump into things, and jumping is super fucking imprecise and difficult. Instead of a simple crouch key, you have to toggle between standing, crouching, or lying down, which is kind of unnecessary. Same thing with leaning around corners. Instead of just quick buttons to peek left and right, you have to precisely adjust the angle of your lean. So it's kind of like real life, but when there's 1,000 killer mutant cyborgs breathing down your neck, you don't want the game to feel like real fucking life. And flying in cyberspace blows ass. First of all, you have to constantly move forward, only able to adjust the speed. You can't stop or reverse. The ability to control pitch, yaw, and roll is pretty sick, except there's a massive delay for all of the above, like you're flying through fucking molasses. Now, this does feel like an intentional stylistic choice, but as with the rest of the game, the concept is sick, but it's goddamn frustrating to actually play. And the problem extends beyond the controls. Everything in the game just feels over-engineered. Starting with your heads-up display, which has about 1,000 fucking features and takes up most of the damn screen. You can switch to full screen mode and minimize most of the visual garbage, but still, to do shit like look at your map, read your messages, use inventory items, or check your ammo, you have to pop open these little modular windows, so the gameplay is constantly interrupted by switching HUD features on and off to try and find the information and settings you need. Each and every weapon has specific options like ammo type and energy level that you have to constantly fiddle around with to get the desired effect. You also have a limited carrying capacity, so you frequently have to drop weapons and items to pick up new ones, and then, if you're OCD like me, obsessively reorganize your inventory. And a lot of the weapons, hardware abilities, dermal patches, and software aren't actually that helpful and will be rarely used by the average player, yet they include a shitload of them anyway. There's a bunch of non-lethal weapons like stun guns and tranquilizers, which are fucking useless in a survival situation. There are 7 different types of grenades with 7 slightly different effects, most of which you'll never really need. And some of the power-ups are pretty redundant too, like do we really need the sight patches and the headlamp and the night vision goggles? And all kinds of completely unusable shit can be picked up and added to your inventory for no goddamn reason at all. It just feels wastefully overcomplicated. Hell, I was well over halfway through the game before I realized that every single item, weapon, and enemy has a really cool custom icon, which you'll never see because they only show up on the information display, which you rarely use. Now, obviously, a lot of these gripes are pretty standard quirks of micromanagey RPG gameplay, but it all feels very out of place and time-consuming in what is still essentially a first-person action game. Also, the level design is a gigantic pain in the ass. As impressive as the game engine is, the levels are still basically built out of a series of cubes, like Wolfenstein 3D. But the maps are fucking massive, twisted, and maze-like. Like, what the fuck kind of layout is this? I can't even tell you how many times I got utterly fucking lost in the sprawling hallways of Citadel Station. Now, you can leave markers on the map for places you want to return to later, and even give them custom labels, but this only helps so much, as finding your way back can be a nightmare in itself. I like a challenge as much as the next guy, but it does get a little fucking ridiculous. And to be perfectly honest, a lot of the graphics kinda suck, even for the time. Now, I very much dig the old school vibe, and the designers accomplished some really cool shit with low-res texture animation, but when it comes to the enemy sprites, the shit just falls flat. Most of the critters in the game are just plain ugly, and their animation is super jerky and unnatural. Not in a cool, spooky way, more like a we've never designed an action game before kinda way. But despite some major issues, I just cannot disregard how detailed, scary, and immersive the folks at Look'n'Glass managed to make this game, especially with the tech they had to work with back in 1994. So I gotta give this bad boy 8 severed heads out of 10. It's a must-play for fans of first-person shooters, survival horror, action RPGs, and cyberpunk in general. So System Shock was originally released as a set of 9, count 'em, 9 fucking floppy disks for old-ass DOS computers. A couple of months later, they released a CD version with better graphics and voice acting. And a year later, this version was also released for Mac computers, featuring a few more graphical improvements. But all of these are unplayable now unless you have an old-ass computer lying around. Fortunately, the good folks at Night Dive Studios, who have made a name for themselves by updating and re-releasing forgotten classic games, created System Shock Enhanced Edition in 2015, which allows you to play the game in high definition with modern controls, or, if you prefer, relive the original pixely-ass DOS experience. You can pick up the Enhanced Edition on Steam for $10, but it's only available for Windows. Fortunately, you can use the emulator DOSBox to play the original version on Mac and Linux, and, thanks to RetroArch, you can also run DOSBox on Android, iOS, Nintendo Switch, and Xbox One. But still no love for the PlayStation 5 now, I hear? Anyway, if you have a Windows computer, I highly recommend buying the new fancy Enhanced Edition, but even if you're just emulating the DOS version, it's still well worth taking the time to get into the creepy-ass guts of Citadel Station and explode some motherfucking cyborgs. Links in the description. Ladies and gentlemen, prepare your anuses for a dope-ass jump.
Nice jump, human.
Oh, fuck me. Till next time, folks. The king is dead. Long live the king.